time, it's high fives for Lewis Hamilton, a five-time champion of the world.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to F1 in Review episode 5. We are concluding the series now with 5 races of Japan, USA, Mexico, Brazil and Abu Dhabi. As always, I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallagher, who will be offering their insightful opinions into the 5 races we are discussing today. So let's get straight into it with Japan. Qualifying finish with Lewis Hamilton in first, Bottas in second and Verstappen in third. The result was exactly the same. Once again we saw Sebastian Vettel and Verstappen. They were once again involved in a collision with each other. We've touched upon this before, but do you think ultimately you want to see them change their racing style to make sure they finish the race ultimately, or do you want to see them go hell for leather at each other? And okay, sometimes they get a win, sometimes they get a third place, but other times of course they crash.
Yeah, I want to see them go for it. I mean, it's what Formula One's all about. The close racing that you get, the best drivers in the world at the helm of the best machinery, going toe-to-toe for race wins. Admittedly, on this occasion, it was only for third place, I think it was. Yeah. But still, those places in the context of the championship matter. They know that every little point counts. So, and you've got also the storyline of Vettel being the 4-time world champion. At that stage, he was in a tight title fight, trying to wrestle back the advantage from Hamilton. But he had the young whippersnapper Verstappen, who he had to try and get past. Verstappen not had the best of seasons, but definitely enhancing his reputation. And I mean, if he held off a 4-time world champion in Vettel in wheel-to-wheel combat, that would only increase his reputation in people's estimations. So, I mean, I give that example in that context. You want to see it with any two drivers, even if it's only for 10th or 12th or 17th place or something like that. You want to see the drivers always go against each other on the track. It might result in crashes sometimes, but again, that's like another extra element, another extra storyline to the unfolding drama. So when you get, I mean, possibly the only people who might want to see them hold back a bit is their team principals, because if you crash into someone and you lose 15, 12, 10 points, that can make a big difference in the Constructors' Championship. Even like across a whole season, small margins can be decided by that. But I think we need to see these drivers go toe-to-toe. It's what Formula One's all about.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that this race was really odd. Actually, it was as you say, it was a lineup. The highlight for me really was Haas, and Romain Grosjean came in 8th, which is pretty good for the Haas Ferrari sort of partnership, and maybe it was indication of how well Haas will do in this upcoming season. They seem to be getting better and better and better, and they've got a gold and black livery, which is pretty cool. Even if you're in last place, you're black and gold. Yeah, it reminds me of Lotus days. Yeah, there's not really much to say about this race, actually. It would have been nice for Hamilton and Bottas to, I hark back to the Rosberg-Hamilton days, where you had that real toe-to-toe racing, wheel-to-wheel. It wasn't great for Mercedes because the amount of times they hit each other and clipped off the wings and stuff like that. But it was brilliant for the fans. And Bottas, just did his job, really. Kind of held back Verstappen. And Verstappen, we know, is particularly ballsy when he wants to be. And, he definitely tried stuff on this race. And, that was it, really. Red Bull and Ricciardo, Red Bull did well this time. And, the track Japan actually does favour them quite nicely, beating up both Raikkonen and Vettel. And Vettel coming 6th in this race did really demonstrate that Hamilton was probably going to win the championship at this point. You start when you get to this point in the year, you start asking whether it's mathematically possible for him to come back. And when they start saying that phrase, mathematically possible, you start to think, do you know what? Although it's mathematically possible, it's technically not. And this was the point where I think most people understood that Lewis Hamilton was probably going to be the de facto world champion. And so we start looking down the team and down the grid, and you start looking at some of the best racing is down between sort of 9 and sort of 14th, and for those last points really 10th place is often the best point in the grid, because you got the outliers of the front cars that are so much faster, and then as soon as you go down the ranks, the lower teams are definitely closer together, and that sort of best of the rest title I think is much more interesting. And so this race for me, the highlight was Grosjean in the Haas, because it was just nice to have not a red or silver car at the top.
Sure. Moving now on to the US Grand Prix. And qualifying was Lewis Hamilton in first, Vettel in second, and Kimi Räikkönen in third. But this switched dramatically, with resulting in Lewis Hamilton finishing third, Max Verstappen in second, and Kimi Räikkönen winning the race. So Kimi Räikkönen, first race he has won since March 2013. We've ranked various other drivers on this podcast series in terms of the modern era and F1 as a whole. Where do you put Kimi Räikkönen? Where do you put the Iceman?
Well, I don't rate him that highly personally overall. I think there was a period of a couple of years in the mid-2000s where he was very fast, came onto the scene, challenged Michael Schumacher for a world championship at a young age. But some of his best years, I think probably arguably his peak year was 2005, but that was mainly because there was a very fast car underneath him. McLaren that year had by far the fastest car. Yes, Renault and Alonso won the championship in the end, but the McLaren would for sure have been in a much better position if it weren't for the reliability of the car. The reliability was awful, constantly failed, and Raikkonen therefore didn't have the talent, even the very fastest car, to take it through to the top. And then in 2007, to be fair, you have to give him credit for taking advantage of the conflict at McLaren. McLaren that year had the fastest car. Ferrari was very close behind. It was basically nip and tuck. But Ferrari and Raikkonen took advantage of McLaren's internal issues, the conflict between Alonso and Hamilton. And at that point, Raikkonen was 28 years old, had a world championship, and people thought, okay, he can kick on from here now, win several and become one of the greats. But I think he just hasn't fulfilled his talent. He's always seems to have this sort of quite lazy attitude, which F1 fans love because they see him as a relaxed character who doesn't really give to, is whatever word you want to put after that. But the fact that I think one thing that epitomizes his career was how after his world championship he had a couple of years where there was one year where the Ferrari was still a top car, but he got outperformed by Massa, who I personally see as an inferior driver. 2009, the car was a bit rubbish, and he won one race, but that was only the race where the Ferrari was the fastest car. And then after that, he went off to the World Rally Championship for 2 years, which I think shows his lack of motivation, really. Not a lack of motivation for motor racing and adrenaline at all, but lack of motivation to stay in Formula One, to fight for his cause. Yes, he has returned and he has shown glimpses of pace, but I don't think that really sort of justifies. I think he definitely had more potential, definitely could have shown more. I'd say, to be honest, the fact he has a world championship, you'd probably say he's one of the best drivers of the modern era. But then we discussed previously drivers like Hamilton, Vettel, Alonso, way higher in my estimations personally. Nico Rosberg, who I didn't rate much when he first came into Formula One, got a world championship, went toe-to-toe with Hamilton for many years. I'd probably rate him above Kimi Räikkönen. But if you did talk about all time, there's been a lot of F1 drivers, and overall Kimi Räikkönen would come into that top bracket. Mainly just the fact he's only one of 33 drivers, I believe, who's won a F1 World Championship out of the 800 or so who started a race. But I think the fact that he could have achieved so much more, it's different. We discussed previously about how Alonso could have achieved a lot more, but I think for him, circumstances went against him a lot. For Raikkonen, I think he hasn't shown the talent that he clearly possesses. He hasn't reached his potential. So therefore, I don't rate him as highly as some people may want to, because there are a lot of people who I think rate him highly because not just because of his talent, but because of his perception to F1 fans. He's recently been voted the most popular F1 driver on the grid, but I don't think you can rate drivers' abilities just based on a popularity contest. And for me, that puts Raikkonen lower down in the list of the greatest drivers.
Oh, I'm gonna disagree with you there. Damn, Kimi Raikkonen, the Iceman. See, I previously determined that Valtteri Bottas was the beige trousers of the Formula 1 grid.
Oh, yes.
And keeping with that sort of theme, Kimi Raikkonen is the definition of smart casual. He is the electric blue chinos that you have in your cupboard, right? That he had his day in 2007. He was world champion, but. And you dig out these electric blue trousers, and people know when you're wearing them, and they're pretty cool, right? They're pretty cool, and they have a statement, and that's what Raikkonen is. He is a statement Formula 1 driver. He comes on the radio, and he says, what's going on with this, and something like that. And people ask him a question, they'll be like, oh, what do you think of the car? And he'll be like, it's great, and just leave it at that. Yeah. He is goals of a Formula 1 driver. He is a fantastic Formula 1 driver. And don't forget, in the 2018 series, Formula 1 championship became third. So this isn't a rubbish driver by any means. He is third in the world still, and so I think that really says everything about him. Really, he's a quick driver. He holds the record at Monza. Or was that the fastest ever? Was that
fastest ever?
Fastest
yes.
ever.
Yeah.
He's the fastest Formula 1 driver ever. Right, that's a pretty good accolade to have, and that's a pretty hard one to beat. You can have, there's only one of those, and there's only one Kimi Raikkonen, and I'm so glad that he'll be driving this year, and he's just a cool guy. He doesn't care, and I think that's why he is brilliant, because he is a bit of a hark back to the old days of Formula 1. With the super cool, everyone wants to be like them. I mean, people used to look up to poster boys like Jim Clark all the time, and I think people do look up to Kimi Raikkonen in the same way. And he came first in the Circuit of the Americas, which was fantastic. It was his first win for a while, and I don't think that's his fault. I think the Ferrari certainly strategized Vettel, as they should do, because he is the he's the challenger to Hamilton. So good on Raikkonen. I would say he's one of the best drivers of the modern era, and I think other drivers look up to him. He's a little bit of the granddad of the group, if you know, and the chinos part. So yeah, that's my opinion on Kimi Raikkonen.
Very interesting. I'm not sure how you guys will feel about this, but a bit of a rogue shout from me. I see a lot of similarities between Raikkonen and Jenson Button. Not only in their sort of, demeanour and personality, but also in their racing tactics as well. So both of them, for example, have had great times, but, in the eyes of others, have perhaps underperformed, and at times are also happy to play second fiddle to a faster, perhaps younger driver. What do you think?
Yeah, I can see that, to be honest. I can agree with a lot of those points. I think, unfortunately, though, for both those two drivers, the one thing they also do have in common is but being both world champions, they could definitely be regarded as some of the best of the modern era. But at the same time, they both played second fiddle to drivers who are considered more superior in the modern era. So you have Button, who had his brilliant year, had his moment in 2009, and since then has proven to be a decently consistent driver. Not setting the world on fire, but he has that sort of experience and guile to get good results out of the bags from time to time. But if we look at his most recent example, going up against a top driver, vastly outclassed by Alonso at McLaren. Before that, took Hamilton to had quite the competition there at McLaren. But overall, Hamilton managed to edge it, and that was a Hamilton before he's reached his current unstoppable prime. Raikkonen has had the same thing with Alonso at Ferrari, and then subsequently with Vettel, where he's had to play second fiddle quite a lot. I think both their careers show that they've had really good past results, and we must give them credit for that for sure. But yeah, I can definitely see the similarities there. But yeah, like I said, whilst there are other drivers, there are other drivers I consider the greatest of the modern era for a reason, and these two, unfortunately, sort of don't quite reach that criteria. But yeah, I can see the similarities you're talking about.
I think both of them show characteristics of maturity, and it takes a very interesting driver to say, actually, do you know what? I think that there is a quicker person in the team, and I don't think it's necessarily their fault either. I mean, in both situations, you had unfortunate circumstances, because you had Raikkonen, who's been in Ferrari for years, through the Ferrari bad times, and you also had you also had the McLaren pretty poor engine and chassis as well. And so in both drivers, you have that common denominator of things didn't really go their way either. And Alonso is the same. If you work out why Alonso didn't really win, you had things not going really his way. There was that moment when he thought he won another world championship, and then the car in front of Hamilton went out, and that was it. Hamilton then won. And then Alonso went off to McLaren, which was a interesting move. So yeah, I don't necessarily think that playing second fiddle. I think it's more that things didn't really go their way, and teams use them as a dependable driver. And Raikkonen, they're similar in very similar ways, but they both have their nuances. Jenson Button had his moment, and he ended up in a similar situation as Raikkonen because the car was rubbish. Hamilton was coming through at that time, and he didn't move around and he stuck to his guns. Raikkonen ended up in a similar situation as Jenson Button because the team favoured Vettel. The Ferrari wasn't particularly amazing, and he also stuck to his guns in Ferrari. So they've gone down similar paths. But I would say they're very different drivers. They both overlap in those sort of ways. But, I mean, unlike Jenson Button, Kimi Raikkonen is the fastest F1 driver in the world.
Would you like to keep saying yes?
I do, because it's not a silly thing to say. It's a very interesting thing. He is a great driver, and Jenson Button lost it at the end. And you're right, Alonso was faster than him in most places, and Jenson Button was a great driver, but he did lose that. I think he lost that spark, which is why he retired. And whereas Kimi Raikkonen, I don't think he has lost the spark. I just think he's honestly said, right, okay, fine, Ferrari, if you think Vettel's going to be better than me, make Vettel better than me. He's not going to turn around and, be like, oh, I don't think this is the right thing to do. He's not going to do a Rosberg and Hamilton.
No.
And both of them kicking up a fuss and being like, oh, I mean, there was a point where Hamilton, was the final year he was with Raikkonen, no, sorry, Rosberg.
Yeah.
And Hamilton was saying, oh, it's only my engines that are breaking. Therefore, there must be something going on the team. There must be something going on the team. And actually, do you know what? It was probably just unlucky. It was just unlucky. And Raikkonen's not going to be petty like that. He's a bit more, but like, fine. If you think he's better than me, make him better than me. But I'm still going to do my best. And, that was it.
Okay, then moving on to Mexico. Qualifying was Ricciardo in first, Max Verstappen in second, and Lewis Hamilton in third. And it finished with Max Verstappen in first, Sebastian Vettel in second, and Kimi Raikkonen in third. Now, in this race, Lewis Hamilton had to finish 7th in this Grand Prix to win the World Championship, and he did just that. But today, we're looking a bit further back in the grid, and we're looking at the race that Van Dorn had. And he finished in a commendable 9th place with a temperamental and underperforming McLaren car, which we've been bearing witness to this season. After he's been axed by McLaren, he has claimed that pundits and team directors alike have ignored his good races. He only finished 16th in the World Championship standing with 12 points in total. With all things considered, do you think he should have got another F1 drive next season, especially when we look at his successful career in F4 Euro Cup and GP2? So, for example, we're looking at 2005, he finished first, 2014 was second, and then 2013 second, 2012 first, and then 2011 third, and 2010 first again. A very good record, but does he deserve another drive?
I think he does. I think as much as some of his performances were not up to scratch, I mean, he lost 21-0 to Alonso in qualifying, that's only happened like once or twice before in F1 history. But I think, his results in the junior formula are so good that no one has ever reached those levels. Not even Lewis Hamilton didn't achieve that much, neither did Vettel, neither did Alonso. Van Dorn has reached unprecedented levels of success before reaching Formula One. And I think he showed his immense talent in his very first race back in 2016. He replaced Fernando Alonso last minute, out-qualified and out-raced Jenson Button back in Bahrain 2016. At that time, that gave the McLaren team boss enough reassurance to think that they could offer him a permanent drive, which he got for 2017. Didn't set the world on fire, but at the same time wasn't atrocious. So he was kept on for another year. He was sort of solidly unspectacular, but last year definitely dropped off for him. He made a decent start, was on par with Alonso in terms of points, etc., in the Drivers' Championship, but really dropped off. I think he went he didn't score points during the 4th race of the season in Azerbaijan, and this race in Mexico which was the 19th race of the season. So he went on a real barren run. But I think he's still only 26, and I think arguably he should have been given another drive. I think it was fair of McLaren to maybe fair of them to get rid of him and promote Lando Norris, young. Not trying to seem biased because he's young and British, but his record in the junior Formula E is also very good. So I think it's fair that he got promoted. But you could argue that maybe Van Dorn could have settled at another team. For example, I'm not a Raikkonen basher, but he's 39 years old now, arguably possibly past it. Surely having a young driver such as Van Dorn in instead would be a better move for Sauber. It could help. They could both develop a young driver, improve him, and get someone with real speed and immense talent. So I think he does deserve another go in F1. This race was an example of him putting in a really commendable performance, coming from 15th on the grid to finish in 9th. Not often that happens in the McLaren. Alonso admittedly didn't have the chance to do that in this race because he retired on the 3rd lap. But still, you've got to beat what's in front of you. If Alonso had been there, he might have finished above Van Dorn, but he wasn't, and Van Dorn had to take advantage, which he did, beating many faster cars in the process, such as the Saubers, the Toro Rossos, the Force Indias. So I think performances like that, and also as much as the Junior Formula E and Formula One itself are very different, you can tell a lot from a guy who comes through, absolutely rips up the running order, absolutely destroys his opponents. I think it's fair to give someone another drive off the back of that. And I think the fact, also keeping a younger driver in F1. 26 is older than most young drivers, I will admit, but still a young enough age to have several years at his peak, really reach his potential. And I still feel like his potential could have been reached even if he'd ended up at a smaller team like Sauber or even Toro Rosso. They might have gone rogue and kept him, taken him instead of a Red Bull driver. So I think it's fair to say he deserved at least one more year, possibly a couple more years after that, depending on where his career went.
Oh, Stoffel Van Dorn, the one that got away. He will be remembered as the what-if guy. What if McLaren was slightly better, and what if he had actually gone to someone like Toro Rosso instead? There is always going to be a few individuals in Formula One that got given a poor chance, and the odds were just stacked against him. And unfortunately, Van Dorn made all the right decisions to get into the Formula One, and then Formula One spat him back out again. I don't think he'll ever race in Formula One again. He's currently in Formula E, and if you're following that, he's doing all right. Not that I'm following much. It's not that interesting compared to Formula One.
Well, actually, correction there. Van Dorn's been given the simulation driver role at Mercedes.
Has he really?
Yes.
Oh, well, we'll soon find out whether or not he actually goes back into Mercedes. Bear in mind, Mercedes have got a few people coming up the ranks, and they've got 2 great drivers at the moment. I can't predict the future. However, I don't know, Van Dorn, I think he will be the one that got away. I think he'll be. We just don't know how good he would have been, and that's the problem. But I don't think he was amazing. Actually, I don't think he was amazing. We were watching the battling at the lower division. Down at 12th, 4th to 15th place, where he usually sit. He was all right. He was fine. He was a fine driver, but he wasn't brilliant. And I didn't see any spark. And sometimes you have terrible people great drivers in terrible cars. And at that point, you think, oh, okay, fair enough. It's only the car that's going wrong. And, there's great examples of moving drivers up. I mean, Verstappen moving up from Toro Rosso showed that spark, a little something genius. And he goes up to, Red Bull. And obviously, they've never looked back since. And Stoffel Van Dorn was given, admittedly, a pretty terrible car. But I never saw that real wheel-to-wheel racing edge that was amazing. Look at Alonso in the same car. Alonso used to make it absolutely miserable for anyone trying to overtake him, especially if it was his old Ferrari teammates. And there was something about that. And, you'd listen to the commentators, they even talk about that as well. But Van Dorn didn't do that. He was a bit of a wet fish. Often. So I think that's the issue. And then Van Dorn has moved on, and I think he will move on. He might come back to Mercedes, and if he does, I really hope he gets that opportunity, because he might prove me wrong. By all means, prove me wrong. Show that little bit of spark of inspiration. But by 26, if you're not in there right now at 26, I don't think he'll be a world champion.
No.
Because I reckon we've got Hamilton for at least 3 more years. Mm-hmm. I think Bottas will stay in Mercedes as long as he possibly can. So I reckon we have 3 to 4 years of that Mercedes lineup right now, which means Van Dorn will be nearly 30, and starting at your career properly at 30 is late. That's a late Formula One. And bear in mind, if you want to do really well in the sport, you've got to make sure that your team is good for 4-5 years. I mean, people say, "Oh, it's really." Look at Hamilton. Hamilton has been incredibly lucky, because to be a 5-time world champion, that means the team you are in has to dominate for half a decade, and that means moving from team A to team B and hoping that you made the right choice. And I just don't think Van Dorn has got that yet.
Yep, you may well be right. So moving on now to Brazil. Qualifying was Lewis Hamilton in first, Vettel in second, Bottas in third. But the results were very different, with Lewis Hamilton in first, Verstappen in second, and Kimi Räikkönen in third. But once again, we're looking back to the latter end of the grid, and we're looking at an incident on lap 44, where Ocon, who had not long ago pitted for fresh tyres, caught the Red Bull of Verstappen, who was trying to unlap himself. Ocon went around the outside of Verstappen in turn 1, and that meant he was on the inside of the right-hander for the turn 2, which immediately follows. Verstappen's right rear caught Ocon's left front as he turned the corner, pitching into a spin and into the runoff area. So this sort of freak incident, which I'm going to call this, for example, what do you think of the conduct and behaviour of both Ocon and Verstappen here? Of course, you've got Ocon on one hand, racing very, very violently and erratically and unnecessarily. But then again, you've got Verstappen outside of the car, showing really his immaturity, his impulsiveness, and to an extent his violence. Were the punishments fair as well? That's what I'm thinking. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we just got a replay here of the crash right in front of me, and reminded me that I remember thinking at the time, like, what on earth was Ocon doing? He was down in 13th or 14th place or something like that. Slightly faster than the leader, but there's trying to overtake the leader maybe down the straight or something, and go around the outside at the end of the straight, and then there's trying to overtake them in an S sequence where you stick your wheel in, hoping to get past the race leader. Got to bear in mind. I think the punishments are fair. Ocon got a penalty in the race, I believe. Verstappen did not receive any penalty in the race, rightly so, because he didn't have his race completely ruined, because he did end up second, but to be honest, he had done a brilliant job in that race at the time. He had started 5th. The Red Bull hadn't been considered as quick as the Mercedes or the Ferrari that weekend, but Verstappen moved up the field so quick, tore past the Ferraris, then Bottas, overtook Hamilton in the pit stops, had a bit of wheel-to-wheel off the pit stops, but managed to consolidate his lead, assert his lead in that Grand Prix. And in the end, it took Ocon being an idiot to prevent Verstappen from winning that race. That's how good he was. And then you saw... One thing I will say, though, after the race, as much as we do like to see the fighting spirit between drivers, sort of maybe sometimes the war of words, like sort of the fighting back and forth, what Verstappen did after the race was a bit petty. So basically, the drivers were getting weighed straight after the race. Verstappen, as you might expect, went to confront Ocon because he felt he'd been taken out unjustifiably, and they had a few words between each other, and Verstappen gave Ocon a shove, which I thought was nice and friendly. But yeah, I think in the heat of the moment, it's easy to lose your temper like that. But I still think for the image of Formula One, you don't want to see two drivers wanting to punch each other up. You can. It's fair enough they want to have a war of words and just like have a strong word with each other, but actual like get into violence and stuff. It's not. I don't know. Not something I want to see too much. And then Verstappen afterwards he's done his punishment. He spent days with the stewards at Formula E races, just sort of, I think to appreciate the tough decisions they have to make. So that was sort of like it was some sort of educational course. But yeah, I think overall the penalties were fair. Ocon got punished for it. The only thing you could say was unfair was that Verstappen lost his race win, possibly. I mean, obviously you can't just reverse the results and give Verstappen the race win because you feel he deserved it. He did deserve it for sure, but sometimes life is like that. It was, like you said, a freak incident, and Verstappen was terribly unlucky.
See, the bit that annoyed me the most was Ocon's adamance he hadn't done anything wrong. There are a few moments, I think, in an F1 driver's career where they would do better to say, that was totally my fault. I'm sorry. That was ridiculous. And Ocon came on and was like, oh, he hit me. And and fine. Yeah, actually, he's right. Verstappen did hit him. But there is a rule in F1 that you are allowed to take the racing line on the apex if you can get half your car length in front of the other driver. Because what that effectively means is you've overtaken. 50% your car plus more means you've overtaken. And Ocon, this is the bit that it just baffles me, right? Because you imagine these two drivers are coming down Verstappen's in the lead, Ocon's at the back, and he thinks, I know what I'll do. I'll beat him in the braking zone, therefore I get part of my car length ahead. But by doing that, you left it way too late to turn in, and because we're in an S zone, you go from the outside to the inside. And so what it means is Ocon comes around the outside of Verstappen, but then has to turn right to the inside. And so you got the inside line of Verstappen. So technically, he's right. He's got part of his car ahead. But as soon as Verstappen's going to come in again, because Verstappen has to turn less to make the corner, that's why Formula 1 cars, the racing line's a racing line, is because you basically optimize how much time you're in a straight line, because that increases your acceleration. Which means Verstappen has the quicker drive out, which means Verstappen is cutting across from Ocon because that's how it usually works. And Ocon never got his car more than 50% of the way across Verstappen's car, which means Ocon has not got priority on the racing line, which means Verstappen, as the race leader as well, has priority here. And I don't understand what he thought he'd get out of it either. Oh, brilliant! I've unlapped myself. Excellent. I'm still last. Just let him go. Don't mess up what everything else is. Whatever he's doing. The race leader, right? You can mess up second and third because that you might have caught up, but you shouldn't have touched him. And I think Verstappen had every right to be blooming angry at that. I was angry at that. And then he has the balls to come onto the radio and be like, "Oh, I did nothing wrong." And it's just no. It shows the inexperience, actually. It shows the experience and the pettiness. And Ocon should have held his hands up and be like, do you know what? Totally my fault there. I messed that up. I apologise now, because that would have set him in such a good standing as well. But that's why people like Jenson Button are one of my favourite racing drivers, because they had that level of honesty about it themselves, and that spirit of, this is a race and it's also a sport, and I'm going to be sporting here and be like, do you know what, this is my fault, I'm really sorry. We've had it in the past where drivers have done that, and it shows that Ocon is oblivious to his surroundings. He shouldn't have done it. He should not have challenged Verstappen, and he shouldn't have decided to do a Daniel Ricciardo and do it on the braking zone at S-Bend as well. If you're going to overtake the race leader, you do it on a straight where you can take the the pull from the car in front, the toe, because that's why Ocon was faster, because he basically got the toe. And then you see if you can do it on the straight. If you don't do it into the bend, because that's when you get wheel-to-wheel racing that ends badly. And that's what I've said. I think Ocon was entirely... I think Ocon should have had a hit on his licence for that. I think that's what the FIA should have done. They should have said, right, do not take out the top, the front. You should, you get a strike in your licence, or at least a race ban, because that is unacceptable. Because that is basically missiling the guy who's winning purposefully, and we know he did it purposefully. And also, like pointed out in the replay, Ocon didn't have his steering wheel on full lock to the right, which means he didn't do everything he could do to avoid hitting Verstappen. It doesn't matter if it made a difference or not. We've seen in the past that full lock on the right, they're doing everything they possibly can to not hit him, and it's a racing accident. Ocon was at half lock to just go around the corner, and then that was it. I just think it was silly.
Sure. Now for the final time in Series 1 of F1 in Review, It is Abu Dhabi, and here we are with qualifying. Lewis Hamilton was in first, Bottas was in second, and Vettel was in third. The results were largely the same, with Hamilton in first, Vettel in second, and Verstappen in third. However, I don't really want to talk about the race this time.
Was it because it was really boring?
Maybe. I want to talk about the circuit, because let's look at this. From 2009 to 2018, there has been 3 times where it's decided a world championship. That's 3 times out of 9 years where Abu Dhabi has served a purpose. So ultimately, for the majority, for 2/3, it has been pointless, worthless, silly. But what are your opinions on the circuit? What do you think needs to be done to make sure that the importance of this race continues? Do you want it to be scrapped? Would you like it to be adapted? What are your thoughts?
Scrapped, to be honest. It's an atrocious race. It's such a shame that Abu Dhabi has the ability to pay the big bucks to make itself the season finale, because for many years, for probably the last 10, 15 years, it's mainly been Brazil. It's been the season decider. Brazil's been home to some classics, for example, 2008 when Hamilton won the championship dramatically. 2012, the very wet race where Vettel and Alonso fought it out for the world championship. At the 3 races that have decided Abu Dhabi, if we think back to it, 2010, that was, to be honest, it ended up being that result because Ferrari messed up their pit strategy, and on any other circuit he was behind a slower Renault in about a 7th or 8th place, and in most other circuits you could overtake, but he was stuck behind Renault Vitaly Petrov for 40 whole laps, all because he couldn't overtake on this boring circuit. 2014 was the other one, again championship decider, but Rosberg's engine basically started to die about 30 laps out the 55 laps, so that rendered that one pointless as well. 2016 was Hamilton trying to hold up the front runner so Rosberg could get overtaken. That didn't work, and Rosberg won the championship. It's just it's such a rubbish track. The first bit is a bit different because you got some fast corners, you got some sort of a nice left right, but after that it's just little chicane, little hairpin, long straight chicane, chicane, hairpin chicane. It's just rubbish for the rest of it. I think it speaks for itself that when the track first came to the F1 calendar in 2009, the thing that was being talked about the most was the fact that pit entry went underneath the track and back out again. That's probably a good barometer for. And also, I remember, excuse the language, but I remember Kimi Räikkönen describing the track back in 2009, saying the first few corners are decent, but the rest of it is shit. So, yeah. So I think it's not a very exciting track to watch either. I think also the other thing that they thought would go in their favour was the fact they made a day to dusk race. So they start the race as the sun is starting to set, and about half an hour, 45 minutes in, it descends into darkness. But again, I think it just by having the tracks under the lights, I don't think can make it any more exciting. The fact of the matter is, before the long straights on the track, the drivers are slowed down a lot, and whilst you think it does close up the drivers behind them. Close up the drivers together. But when the gaps are that small, the grip levels for the driver behind are so reduced that they struggle to get out the corner, and the gap would be increased again, and it wouldn't be enough for an overtake to happen. You could say that might be. Some people would say that's a problem with how F1 cars are formulated, but in my opinion, you see other circuits on the calendar. Mexico would be one example where you have a long straight and a slow corner, then another long straight. You do get some overtakes from time to time. That's just one example that springs to mind. Bahrain's another one where there's lots of sort of straights punctuated by slow corners, but you get brilliant racing there. But Abu Dhabi, putting the slowest corners on the track before the longest straights and then keeping on doing that is proven not to be a recipe for success. And to be honest, it's not like the most sort of restricted street circuit in the world. There is room possibly for a few corners to be altered, but that would probably include cutting off half the track, and then the lap would be too short for F1. So I think, to be honest, the best solution is to scrap it. There are already lots of races in the Middle East competing against each other. So yeah, it's rubbish. I think just get rid of it.
If you want a really good case study of how not to do a track, you look at Abu Dhabi, and part of the reason for that is, as you rightly highlight, the abysmal corners, and they're continuous radial corners. You enter in at this many degrees, and you come out at the exact same degrees. If you want to look at how you do it for Formula One track, take a look at China. There are, it's hard to describe, but there are a few corners. Corner 13, the good one is 11, 12, and 13, right? You enter in a very tight left-hand, very tight corner, and then it goes out into a much lesser tight corner. It changes the radius, and what that means is to drive it means that you have to adapt your racing line continuously, be on the throttle, be on the brake, and basically bring the car around. And it's brilliant. It's a fantastic way to do it. Whereas in Abu Dhabi, it's just a corner. It's just an alteration of a straight line. That's all it is. Whereas in other Formula One tracks, you have to adapt your racing style as well. And also, if you're trying to overtake a car on a continuous radial corner, it's quite easy because you know where they're going to be at the end of it, because there is one very normal racing line. China is amazing because, especially after the start-finish straight, you have that very long sweeping sort of a spiral corner that's right, and then it makes you flick left. And there isn't one way to drive that. There are multiple ways to drive it depending on your downforce and how well you're managing your throttle and your brake. So it makes it driving and makes overtaking very, very difficult and just really interesting. If you want to see how to do elevation correctly, you take a look at Spa with that very dip all the way up down to the straight. That's brilliant. And Abu Dhabi has none of that. It's so mundane. It's so beige, right? It's
really?
utterly. It is the soggy biscuit of racing tracks. It's so bad. There's nothing interesting about it. Last year, I convinced one of my housemates to watch a Formula One race with me. And annoyingly, they refused until the very last track. And I said, right, okay, sit down. We're going to watch Abu Dhabi. And this is going to be rubbish. And there was that little bit. There was a moment last year where there was a slight accident, I think, happened.
Yes, it was, yes.
Yeah. That was interesting. I said, "God, crikey, that's the most interesting Abu Dhabi's ever got." And you have these long, as you rightly say, you have these long straights where the faster car goes away from the slower car or the car with more downforce. Then they bunch up again at the tight corner, and then they extend again and concertina out at the long straight, and then you have a brief moment of sort of, tight-ish corners, but they're just rubbish. It's just rubbish. I don't think they should scrap it because that's a bit mean. Just axe them because no one likes them. Bear in mind, Abu Dhabi give them a lot of money, huge amounts of money. Although I would have thought for a country that has so much money, they could have employed a better track designer. All they had to do was go, right, what's the best bit from Monza? What's the best bit from China? What's the best bit from Spa? What's the best bit from all these tracks? Cool, let's amalgamate it into one ultimate track.
But as long as it fits with the hotel.
Yeah. And they could have even built in elevation change. But elevation change is a fantastic thing to do. In fact, elevation change on a start straight just a long straight is brilliant. That's why we have a Spa. But no, they didn't do any of that. They just built something that is pretty bad. I mean, it's a great way to train rubbish Formula One drivers because it's a very easy track to drive. So yeah, Abu Dhabi, it's a bit of a letdown. It's a lead balloon of the Formula One season. It's a bit of a shame to end it there, really, isn't it?
But we're not ending it there.
Oh.
I mean, there's one more question that remains. So, of this season, 2008 Formula One World Championship, who has been the biggest surprise and the biggest flop? You can either take this as the interpretation of either a driver or a constructor. But to you, who's had the high point and who's had the worst point?
I'm not speaking to the microphone. I'm going to do flop and surprise for both driver and constructor. For flop, for drivers, got to say Stoffel Van Dorn. I thought we discussed him already. I thought he would do better for sure. He just hasn't lived up to standards. Even if he'd been within, to be honest, you got to say with Alonso's level of performance, even if he'd been within half of Alonso's performance, that would have arguably been respectable. But with his pedigree from the junior categories, you'd expect more from him. To be honest, my biggest surprise, I don't think it's a surprise that Charles Leclerc excelled. I think it's a surprise that he so comprehensively beat Marcus Ericsson. I thought Ericsson's always been, not too bad, a bit solid around the back, but he'll do a job for you. But Leclerc has come in after a shaky start, has absolutely blown Ericsson out of the water. So much so that Leclerc is now at Ferrari and Ericsson is out of Formula One altogether. He sort of scared him out of it. Probably, I did expect Leclerc to beat Ericsson, but in the end he beat him by a points margin of 37-9, I think it was, which is, in Formula One terms, for a rookie driver to go in and beat a guy who'd been in there 5 seasons, that's an enormous margin. So, moving on to the constructors. Surprise, I'd probably say, honestly, I'd say surprise and flop, you could both put McLaren and Williams in both those categories, honestly. Surprised that they were both so terrible. And because they were so terrible, they're both flops. Yeah, pretty much. McLaren, I mean, they've been promising for years and years they would get better. They said their car was one of the best on the grid, and that it was just the engine which was the problem. They switched from a Honda to a Renault engine, and they went backwards, which proves their chassis is completely rubbish as well. So for years and years, they've been blaming it on the wrong people, the wrong elements of the car. They need to take a good, hard, long look at themselves. Williams, they had a low-key season last year into 2017, I'd say, finishing 5th, quite a way off Force India in 4th, having beaten them, or sort of only just been behind them the year before. But in 2018, they really, really dropped off, scoring only 5 points in the end between their two drivers. I think it's massively sad to see that, and we do hope that they come back to being higher up the grid as soon as possible, because it's always good when Williams succeed. But in 2018 terms, with their whole car and engine package, it was awful. So they got to be a flop as well, personally.
I think you summed up very well there, actually. I mean, if in my opinion, I have to place one as being a flop, and that would be Williams, simply because it takes a huge amount of effort, skill, time, and money to make your car worse than it was last year. They could have done nothing, and they would have been slightly faster. And, the biggest surprise, though, for me throughout the whole season, because I think most people could probably make educated guesses where everything would be, was Force India going bankrupt. And the changes, and that was the biggest shocking moment for me, was hearing that they were changing. Less of a shock from that was that Lance Stroll was suddenly going to become the Racing Point leader because of his daddy. I mean, what? Lance Stroll was pretty rubbish. I don't think he's a great driver, actually. I'll soon find out. I might eat my words at the end of next season, but I don't think he's amazing. I mean, feel free to disagree with me. I thought that Sorokin was unfortunate, and he was a bit of a flop as well. Okay, biggest surprise for them doing well for me is Kimi Räikkönen, 3rd in the world, beating Bottas. I think that's to tell you something, and I think the Mercedes is the better car, and I think it proves my opinions right about him, actually. That there was no surprise Lewis Hamilton won, there was no surprise that Vettel came 2nd, but the surprise for me was Kimi Räikkönen came 3rd, and also don't forget Verstappen came 4th. That was a pretty good one as well. Yeah. But Räikkönen for me was driver of the year. What a way to go out! I just think it was a good way to go out. He made the best out of the situation. He was the best of the rest, I would say. Ignoring 1st and 2nd, 3rd is the best of the rest. Räikkönen got best of the rest. He got the fastest Formula 1 driver ever. I love that. He is, for me, the Iceman, the Flying Finn. He's amazing. And I think Bottas was actually a bit of a flop as well. I mean, in terms of the top drivers, I would say he's the worst of the 4 drivers. I don't have anything against Bottas. I really don't. I think he's a fantastic driver, but he's just not amazing in the. I think it's because I liked the Rosberg Hamilton days so much that Bottas now is just unimagined. He's just unimaginative and pretty normal. He's a digestive. Or he's just a digestive biscuit. So that's the thing. And what I hope for 2019 is I really hope that McLaren come back. As you said, they were pretty rubbish as well. I hope McLaren have got back. I hope Williams comes back. My God, it'd be nice if they came back.
It's not looking that way, though, is it?
No, it really isn't.
No.
Well, we don't know that. They haven't actually been to testing, so I don't know. I don't know if they are looking good or not. Okay. That might just be a slight issue. We have no idea. I really hope they come back because don't forget, Williams is the last of the sort of that legacy named teams. One of the last ones. They're one of the, and Frank still has control, and his daughter is doing an amazing job. I think they're being so unlucky. Bear in mind they have a fraction of the money to deal with the new innovations or whatever. I hope Renault do well as well. I mean, I hope everyone does well. I just want this season, if I hope for one thing, would be that 1 to 10. It'd be really great if 1 to 10 had battles, proper battles, or even 2 to 10, because if you're in the lead, you get the nice clean laminar air and you get the advantage. 2 to 10, please, let's have some proper battling going on there, because we only get that from 9th to sort of, sometimes 18th, 19th, 20th. So that would be good. But yeah, for me, number 1 was Raikkonen, and at the bottom for me was sort of Lance Stroll, Stoffel Van Dorn.
Sure. So for me, playing devil's advocate, I'm going to give it to you with a sort of a hybrid answer. Biggest flop, I would say, would be for me Romain Grosjean and to an extent Haas.
Really?
Really? Because I thought how well they started off in Australia, for example, and the fact that not only the car let them down, but also Grosjean himself let the team down. And I think it was incredibly disappointing seeing how good the team could be, that they didn't sustain a fight against Renault, against the likes of Hulkenberg, who I think is a very good driver. Going on to biggest surprise, or lack of surprise, I'd say probably Hulkenberg would definitely be up there as well. I mean, the guy wasn't on the podium, but has consistently been hitting top 10s. We see, 7th, 6th, 6th, and then he retires a couple of times. 8th, 7th, 9th, 6th, 5th, and then a couple of other ones. And then 10, 6th, and 6th. Now, that's very consistent. And I think, ultimately, he's a driver who, in my opinion, doesn't get enough credit as he deserves. Another flop, however, I'd say, would be a mixture of Red Bull and Ricciardo, in the sense that we've historically seen Red Bull, the car being ridiculously temperamental and inconsistent. The number of retirements that Ricciardo has had is going on into 9, and Verstappen as well has a cool 3 to his name. And let's be forget, a couple of years ago, the boot was on the other foot, and Verstappen was retiring. And I think ultimately, the fact that Red Bull haven't been able to consistently challenge the top 2 teams, for me, is a disappointment and ultimately a failure. But that on that very sour note, we conclude episode 5, the final episode of F1 in Review Series 1. We will be returning in some capacity, not only for a review of next season, but also for talk and discussion regarding the testing of the races to come.
Tom, after all this, do you still, because in the first one you called us experts, do you still regard us as experts?
I regard you as insightful individuals.
We lost the expert.
Political correctness, cheers.
But anyway, for the last time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in a future podcast.